this a little bit because I don't want to run long, and Gord asked me for a few minutes at the end, so I want to make sure I accommodate that. So we're going to compress this just a little bit, but we'll try and get our point across anyway. So go ahead and have a seat, guys. So come on, how come I can't open my computer here? Bear with me. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves to start with?
So, hello everyone. I'm Zen. I'm an owner of Silex fiberglass windows and doors. We manufacture fiberglass windows and doors in Winnipeg here. So I lose sleep over water testing and site testing, like a lot of you in this room. And I have 20 years experience in the industry. I found out it's one thing I learned from this 20 years experience is window manufacturing and technical side is only in probably half of the battle. The biggest challenge is making things work on site, and especially when you have testing standard that's not matched with the reality. That's the reason I'm involved with this CSA A440.8 group, and I hope to bring some of the real life experience and practical experience into this this testing group. It's been a pleasure. I'm very excited to be in this part of the panel discussion. I think this kind of discussion is actually making the industry moving forward. And I'm glad you are all here with us.
Thanks. I'm Dave Goldsmith. I work for Cornerstone Building Brands Canada, Inc., and we manufacture windows, primarily vinyl windows in Calgary, Alberta, for primarily the Alberta and BC market. And I'm a perpetual victim of poor field water testing practices, particularly in BC.
I'm the guy that does the testing, but not on his stuff. I'm Brian Boyle with Intertech. I'm based here in Winnipeg. We do product testing for window manufacturers to get their NAF certification, and we also do field testing for air and water leakage, primarily in Manitoba, but we pretty much do all the prairies.
Okay, so site testing. I was also a longtime window manufacturer in British Columbia, faced with many site tests that oftentimes were challenging and frustrating and all of those things that go along with that. So we started getting inquiries from other manufacturers about site test practices and the inconsistency and what the rules are, who's doing it, all of those different questions. So at Fenestration Canada, we struck a small group. There was about, about 10 of us, something like that. Started meeting, and we put together some documents. So one of them is complete. It's on our website, and it basically looked at sort of the status today of what's happening across the country when it comes to site testing of products. It just talks about some of those challenges that we've already mentioned. So that one's done. We're also working on two more. One of them is diagnosing failures and preparing for testing, and the other one talks about like contract language and managing sort of that pre-test situation that you're going to get yourself into. Those two are really close. They're not finished because I've been way too busy to finish them the last couple of months, but they're very close. We should have them done very soon. So during all of those conversations and our task group doing what it was doing, we were able to garner the attention of CSA. So CSA reached out to me and asked me if I would be interested in putting together a seed document for a new standard for fenestration testing. So on-site fenestration testing. Must be getting late in the day. The tongue's not working. So of course I jumped at it. So I drafted a document that would outline what a new standard for Canada might look like, some of the things that our group talked about, some things that specifically frustrated me in that process. So now CSA was able to get the funding. So now there is a group of about 15 of us, I think, Brian, something like that. Brian participates, Dave participates. Jen, you've been in there too, right? Yeah, I think. So we've had a number of meetings. We've broken out some different subgroups to work on some of the specific items. So the goal is to have a Canadian in situ fenestration test standard for air and water leakage and penetration done by the end of this year. A pretty aggressive timeline, of course, but that's where we are. So what I was hoping to do today was just to kind of, share some of that work that we've been doing, some of those conversations, and hopefully to get some feedback from people here that experience on-site product testing and some of the difficulties with that. So let's maybe talk a little bit about sort of some of those specific frustrating and inconsistent issues. And one of the ones that we came across was who's doing that testing. And we've all experienced, pickup truck and shop vac guys doing water testing. We've experienced guys like Brian, who works for Intertech, that obviously has accreditations and structure and all of those things. So maybe just, if I could, I'll just get you guys to kind of share your point of view and what your experience has been with some of the people that maybe, aren't doing the best job when it comes to on-site testing of products.
Well, things are improving, but a few years ago in BC, you had precisely the kind of guys that Terry just described. And, I would be in Calgary and he'd be flying out to Kelowna to be witnessing water testing at 9 a.m. And I'd get there to be told, we already tested your window and it already failed. And we think it was a glazing leak, but we're not going to show it to you because we got to leave and go to the next job. And I'd be like, I flew out from Calgary. I want to see this glazing leak. So he ran it for another cycle for me, and the water wasn't coming from the glazing. It dripped down from the head of the sash and landed on the glazing stop, which he didn't see. And then I said, open the sash and undo the sash restrictor so I can open it fully. The weather strip was filthy, covered with like vinyl shavings from the manufacturing process. And once we cleaned that off, we were able to get a pass. But if I hadn't been there, it would have been send your people out here to investigate and remediate glazing leaks and then do this remediation on all the units in the building before we'll come out and we'll test 3 more randomly. And another frustrating thing, and it's funny, so yesterday afternoon at about 4 o'clock Calgary time, somebody sent me an email, which I didn't read until this morning because I was traveling here, telling me that we're going to have a field water test at a project in Red Deer this morning at 9 a.m. Calgary time.
Did you make
and
it?
I half expect to get an email saying you failed. And then I'll be like, how did you fail? How did we fail? What happened?
Yeah.
Like, when we pulled the poly off, there was water.
Yeah,
Where did it come from?
the whole thing about notice of test and that is a point that we're going to talk about. Jen, your experience with on-site testing and people that maybe are not qualified.
Just one example, and sometimes there's one time we see a testing agent that testing with a faulty equipment, and he's experiencing the pressure spikes. The testing is supposed to be 300 Pascal, but he started with 500 on each cycle, and that continues about 30 seconds on each cycle. So we question that why it's this way, and you should stop the testing. And interestingly, he answered this is we're doing an average pressure in this test, which I found this very interesting. Other times, like we've seen people using wrong testing standard, not following ASTM 11.5. There's different, of course, there's challenges. There's different standards in our industry, but the testing agent, they should read the specs and follow the testing standard.
So
I agree with that. And when I attend the water test these days, I bring my own digital manometer for a second opinion, because I had an experience in Kelowna where the guy was testing a slider, and it immediately started spurting water up like a volcano at what he thought was 300 pascals. And I said, no, there's something wrong there. And I took a look at his digital manometer, and the tube was visibly aged and cracked where it went on the nipple of the manometer. And I said, okay, trim that off, get a fresh piece. We were at over 1,000 pascals.
And
like
you still didn't
1,500 or
pass?
something like that.
So
Yeah.
Brian, what makes a qualified technician for on-site testing?
So a lot of it is experience and proper training. You certainly got to make sure you use the proper equipment. And by that, I mean equipment that was designed for the purpose of testing. You want to make sure that equipment is calibrated within appropriate calibration intervals. And I think the standards actually give minimum intervals for calibration. The other thing is you need to know, so the problem with, we have ASTM test standard that tell you how to do a test and how to get a result. But what they don't do is give you parameters for how to determine the test pressure for your specific project. So if you have a tester that's unfamiliar with NAFs, so let me give you an example. So let's say there's a project specification that says, okay, we want you to run a water test to ASTM E1105. If that spec says, okay, the field test pressure shall be 330 pascals, well, then you know what you have to do. The problem is, what if it doesn't say that? I can think of 4 pressures off the top of my head that I can pick to run that test at and have some justification to do all 4. I could say, okay, well, the building code requirement is maybe 220 pascals. I'm going to run it to that. Or I could say, the spec gives you a window performance requirement of 330 pascals. I'm going to choose to run it at that. Or I could say, well, the window label says 720 pascal. Maybe I'll run it to that. Or I'll say, well, there's a standard, we see it in the States more so than in Canada, AMA 502, that says test at 2/3 of the laboratory rated pressure. I'm going to run it to that. So you may have a job and 4 different test agents will choose to test that window at a different pressure.
And are any of them wrong, quote unquote, in doing what you're suggesting?
Technically, no, because there's a justification to do all 4. And that's problematic, obviously.
Right.
Personally, I think that if you have a job-specific requirement, that's what you should go to. But you might have a test agent that completely disagrees with that.
Yeah.
So one of the purposes of this standard that we're developing is to give a protocol for how to run a test from start to finish. So to take any vague or variances out of the hands, out of the hands of the tester, so everybody's doing the same thing.
Yeah. That's definitely a problem. And one of that was a key item that we heard about and that we were building into the FenCon documents, as well as working it into the new standard, is all about dealing with your contract and reading the specs and making sure that the specs for any on-site testing that's going to be done are very, very clear, so that you don't run into, you show up with your window and it's got a label that says 550. Well, that might have been all fine and good in the lab under very, very controlled conditions, but in the field, like Dave says, and again, we got into this whole thing about a product in the field is much different than a product in the lab for a wide variety of reasons, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So you guys mentioned equipment, right? And that's something else that we're definitely diving into is the equipment. I mentioned the pickup truck guy and a shop vac, and maybe a spray hose or whatever he might have. So what's the equipment, and how is it treated, like for an accredited test agent?
So apart from the calibration requirements, and most of our critical equipment is calibrated at 6-month intervals. So that would be our pressure gauges on our spray rack, the spray rack itself, our manometers that we use, our thermocouple readers, our airflow meters. So they're at 6 months. In addition, and this is critically important for a field test agent that's doing a lot of traveling. You throw a piece of equipment on a plane, it gets bounced around in freight. By the time you get to site, you may have a valid calibration certificate, but that equipment might be out of calibration. So it's critical to do a sort of a spot verification on site to make sure that the equipment's working. Like, for your spray rack, take a look at the nozzles. Make sure you're spraying in a proper spray pattern. Make sure, and I think if you've been doing tests, you kind of know what your spray rack should look like. You should know kind of what your pressure numbers should be at a property. So just do a verification to make sure the equipment you're using is not giving you false results.
Right. So Dave and Jen, so always not a problem. I mean, you already commented to it, obviously, but so as a manufacturer on site, what should you be looking for when you get to that job and they're going to start testing your product?
Yeah, to start with, you need to get there before they start prepping it, okay? Because they need to, if it's a window, like a casement, they need to open it, check that there's no dirt or debris from the construction phase on the weather stripping, that the weather stripping's clean, that when the window's closed, it was installed properly so that it's plumb and square. And so it has the best chances of performing in the field like it did in the lab. And as far as their test equipment is concerned, it might seem a little nitpicky to say where's the calibration of your spray rack and where's the calibration of your manometer. But what we're finding out there, a lot of the companies out there want you to fail. They've got a contract that they're going to test 3 windows for $3,000. And if any fail, they're going to come back and they'll test the window that failed and they're going to test another 2. And so they love it when you fail. They absolutely love it when you fail. And they will they'll play dirty to get you to fail because they're going to get to come out some more and they're going to get to do double the testing that was originally budgeted for by the building owner, and they're going to get to charge that to you, the manufacturer. And so you need to have some things upon which you can push back when they're doing unfair practices.
Right. And our documents that we're developing really dive into that, right? I mean, we really talk about making sure your contract language is right, making sure that you're asking for calibration certificates, training, which gets really gray because Brian, there is not a training program out there that qualifies, quote unquote, an on-site tester. So that's it's a bit of a gray area. So we get into talking about is that technician working for a accredited agent like a test lab, for example? Have they been doing it for X number of years or whatever that time frame looks like? So getting some assurances that whoever's doing that work and the equipment that they're using is correct and up to date and proper spray patterns. And I think, Dave, it was one you told me about where it was a large window.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so it was a very large 3-panel window, and the spray rack would only cover one of the panels at a time. So they ran that test for an hour and moved the spray rack every few minutes. And then there's other ones that use spray racks that are far too small, and then they make you pass easily. And so now they're deceiving themselves as to the performance of the window because it's hardly spraying anything on the window. And then you're like, well, I'm glad it wasn't Brian Boyle from Intertech testing today because he probably would have failed my window.
So, Brian, we talked about that very item in our last call, right? About dealing with large products. And can you maybe share a bit about the sectional details that we talked about in testing?
Yeah, you will. So generally you want to have a full spray pattern on the product you're testing. Now, if you've got a massive window, unless you can tie directly into the city's fire hydrant, you're not going to get water pressure. So you've got to be very careful about how you section windows. You're allowed to section, but it's got to be done properly. So, ideally, if you had let's say a 20-foot window and your spray rack gave you a 10-foot coverage, well, then mask off the section that you're not spraying so the overspray from your first test isn't contacting the area you're going to do in your second segment, right?
Yeah. So Jen, I know that you ran into some of that difficulty of product testing and failures and what constitutes a failure. Can you maybe share just a bit of the struggle of trying to define the failure?
One thing I just want to add more to Dave's point is those are great points, and we should check the window itself. But also, I think very often the spec says we're testing an installed window. When you ask the installer, the site supervisor, the architect, you'll be surprised what's the definition of installed window. And we can't really test the window when it's fully installed. Like in ARMA 502, it spells out what the installed window look like. But very often we show up on site, the window is halfway installed. and test agent is already there, especially it's in the remote area. And of course, they're going to perform the window test, but we're not going to get the result we want.
So, and it's one of the most annoying things about the field water testing, other than the fact that it is a torture test that is far exceeds what actual exposure conditions of the windows will be exposed to, but we can't change that. We're not trying to rewrite standards. The standard is what it is. But the really frustrating thing to me is this building envelope and window testing thing was commissioned because of the leaky condo issue primarily in BC.
Yeah.
And it's being done to protect the building owner by protecting the building envelope against deterioration. And quite frequently they do not. It's in such a state of installation that they are not testing the installation at all. They're just testing the window. And then if there's a teeny little glazing leak, right, that falls into a drained cavity and drains out that couldn't ever possibly cause building envelope damage, that's a really big, serious deal. But there could be water in the wall that they're not seeing.
Yeah.
You know? And so they've lost sight of the purpose, and they're not focused on protecting the building owner, and the building owner thinks they're getting protected, and they're just kind of victimizing window manufacturers of small quality problems that result in a minor glazing leak in 1 out of every 10 panes that, you know, doesn't appear until, you know, you're halfway through the 4th cycle, right? And now you're into remediating the glazing on all the windows in the building. We're working to get 100%. And not have 0% failure in the plant. We're bringing in new test equipment that will test the largest size windows. You know, so we hope to get there by other means, but it just seems totally unrealistic, you know, to focus on something that as a building envelope issue is not a major deal. But you're going to remediate the glazing on every window in the building because of that little teeny droplet of water that appeared on the glazing leg.
Exactly. Jen, back to your point, and this is something else that we talked about when we talked about providing guidance on contract language and that. When is that window tested? And is the window design maybe meant to work with the cladding and flashing and pan designs of that building? So if you start testing that product before any of those exterior components, or interior for that matter, are installed, you know, are you being fair to the design and the protection of that envelope as it's going to be when the building's finished? Now, oftentimes the argument that I heard was that, well, we can't do all of that because if we have a failure at that point, then it's going to be a lot more costly. Okay, I understand that, but it certainly puts the window supplier at a disadvantage when you're dealing with testing a product that now oftentimes has the envelope, rough opening around that window exposed, and now there's a leak through that install potentially, and now the window guy's on the hook for 3 more tests, and obviously, you know, more opportunity for a failure as you test more products.
That's why the smart money is on a mock-up, and virtually every specification I see calls for a window and door mock-up prior to beginning installation of any of the windows, and is done maybe in 1 out of every 30 cases, you know? So, and the very worst things that can happen is when the entire building's completed, okay, and then the building owner goes to sell it to another building owner or property management company, and the original building owner didn't give a darn about field water testing.
Yeah.
The new building owner is like, where's all your field water testing and your signed and sealed window and door shop drawings? You know, and people are moving in next week.
Sounds like something you experienced.
Oh, I have experienced that, yes.
We're a little bit luckier in Manitoba because at least on a lot of the school projects and multifamily res where we're getting field testing, a lot of the time a mock-up is done. Or certainly, maybe not the first window, but in the first batch of windows that are done, we're getting the experience in Manitoba is a little bit different. But I can see how that can be problematic if you've installed 3/4 of the windows and then you start testing.
Yeah. Leaning into failures a little bit again and the definition of failures. I was in a call recently with the group that works on the NAFS document, and there was a question about looking at failure definitions to review and revise. And basically, the group threw their hands up in the air and said, we can't come to a consensus on what a definition is of a failure, right? So you talk, Dave, mentioning about pressures and that are problematic, but I mean, I think we've all experienced a sliding patio door in a test. You're in the fourth cycle, and there's some percolating at the bottom of the interlock, and you get half a dozen drops on the floor, quote unquote, and it's a failure.
Yep.
I mean, are we truly serving the building and the window manufacturer and everybody else by that being a failure? So, one of the things that we're going to be working on, we're not there yet, is the definition of failures. We need to really dial that in and make it really specific so the interpretation is taken out of it, because we're faced with a lot of interpretations about what constitutes a water failure. Now, I know, Grant, you were showing us earlier, and it's very common in BC where you have a sill pan under the window, rod and caulk detail at the back of the window, and now in a water test, you're going to have a lot of water in that rough opening because there's nothing protecting it from getting in there. How can you find a failure of the window below the window, which oftentimes where these failures are pointed out, if that now is an open cavity that has water in it because it's not finished, it's not flashed, it's not cladded. So the definition of failures is something that we're really going to have to dive into and come up with not only failures that make sense from a water penetration into the building, but under the window or around the window. And what does that look like when we're dealing with, open cavities to the exterior and a rod caulk detail at the back with sill pans? I don't know. I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah. So the reality is, if you're testing a window installed in a rain-screened rough opening detail, basically the interior seal and joint, which is now your primary weather barrier, has to be in place for the test. Otherwise, you're just going to pull water right into the building. So if the window is leaking out the bottom, you can't see it. Unless you do some sort of staged test where you mask off the outside, then you can't do this. Then you have to run the test twice, and you couldn't even do it in the same day because your interior seal and joint wouldn't be installed. So if a window is leaking out of the bottom in a drain rough opening, as a tester, you're never going to see it unless you get lucky somehow. Really what you're looking at is the glazing going to leak? Is somehow water getting through a miter joint or a mull joint on the inside face, or is the interior sealant joint leaking, which is now your primary weather barrier, so that can't leak. Right. But if the window is dripping out of the bottom, you're not going to see it.
So when the entire country is at that point where we're doing sill pans and interior seals, if the window does leak into that pan, does anybody care at that point? I'm just being facetious.
It depends if that's what the design is if it's meant to do that, right? Mm-hmm. Versus meant to provide a level of protection against occasional water penetration, right? So is somebody creating a drainage system under the window where they're designed it to let water in and then flow back out again? Or does somebody sloped and flashed it and sealed it to prevent against occasional issues? And it's not. And so, for example, our presenter earlier on the installation was showing an interesting detail where it was sealed against the face of the window, and it was designed to have water come in and all the way down and escape behind flashing and stuff like that. Right. So in a case like that, you do expect water to be there as part of the design. And so it becomes problematic if they're asking for a factory applied jam extension, right? And now that joint is wetted because they put the seal all the way back at the innermost plane of the jam liner. So now you got a pressure differential at the joint of the jam liner to the window frame. And now and this has happened to me, it's leaking there. It's like, it's not sealed there. We didn't design it. If we knew that this was your design, we could have talked to you about some way of sealing the jam liner to the frame, right? If we knew up front that this was your design. But we just assume because nobody does this, so don't blame us when water comes between the jam liner and the frame. It's not designed. It's just an interior trim piece. It's not a part of the water resistive.
But because the window came with the jam liner, whoever does that detail just does it where you can get to.
Yep.
Yeah. I've experienced that as well. So, I mean, what about oversight of site testing agents? You know, we don't have it today. You have some oversight because you work for a lab that's accredited. So they obviously have things like training and equipment accreditation, calibration, et cetera. Today, we don't have anything that is a program for site testers. I mean, we talked a little bit about trying to provide some criteria for non-accredited test agents. Can you maybe comment to some of the things that we talked about there?
Yeah, what we kind of thought is if you wanted to have a non-accredited tester, like we're trying to say, how do we not exclude non-accredited test agents, but make it so it's not just a guy showing up with a leaf blower? And what we thought was, okay, well, let's make non-accredited people have the same requirements as accredited agents, but just not be accredited. And what I mean by that is have them demonstrate that they have a quality program that demonstrates that the testers have been trained, that the equipment has been calibrated, basically everything that an accredited tester would have to go through without having to get certified on your own. And I don't know that there's another step between that and being accredited.
Yeah, right.
Like if we're saying that as a minimum, we can't go any more than that without an actual accreditation. But I think that would alleviate some of the worries of manufacturers about having guys who just don't know what they're doing going out and running tests.
You know where I see a big disconnect is the building envelope consultant, who's typically a different person than the testing agency. And the building envelope consultant is, if my testing agency says something leaked, then it's a big, hairy deal, right? But the building envelope consultants are not, their minds are not in it, right? And so that's why we wind up with the unreasonable situations. And these are people who never come to any Fenestration Canada events. So we're always sat here preaching to the choir all the time, right? And we never, except on a person-to-person basis, we never have this conversation of like what's reasonable and what's not reasonable and what are you actually trying to achieve here when you're protecting the building owner. It's like they seem disinterested. And so it's one of the reasons that we're having to come up with a written standard, because it's something that can open the conversation with the building envelope consultant. You know, I don't know. I don't want to say anything blanket about building envelope consultants, you know, but I think they don't have their eyes on the ball, really, in terms of protecting the building owner.
Are they serving the intent of what this is supposed to be?
Are they serving the intent?
Yeah.
Or are they just going through the motions? If you're creating a huge deal out of a single drop of water when you tested 3 windows that could never make it any interior finishes and could never threaten the rough opening, right?
Yeah.
Your eye is not on the ball.
Yeah.
Right.
Jen?
And now you can never argue. It's like the dog ate my lunch, right? They're not supposed to leak. We agree. But
we don't dispute
workmanship is a thing. We haven't got to the point where our factories have only 2 employees, a man and a dog, and the man is there for security, and the dog is to make sure the man doesn't touch any of the automated equipment that's making the windows that are perfect, right? We have actual human beings doing the glazing, right? And it requires workmanship still. We haven't been able to design that out.
Yeah, for sure.
So
Jen,
Where
go
it
ahead.
gets where it gets tricky. Go ahead, Jen.
Just want to add something to David. When you were talking about building envelope consultant, sometimes I feel jealous. I have to say, in this part of the country, sometimes architects they take this role under their fees, so they actually have to hire a building envelope consultant, and it's end up with whoever they can afford to, and this expert sometimes is testing agent itself, and it's not fair for the testing agent because they're not involved when the project is designed. They're taking extra liability, and also it's create a conflict of interest situation. That's I see happens a lot in this part of the country.
Do you have a microphone?
Yeah, where it gets tricky is if you've got, let's use the percolation example, by the strictest letter of NAF's law, percolation's a
Yep.
failure, right?
Yep.
It's a moldage. Yeah.
Will that percolation affect anything that happens in the field?
No.
Who knows? But if it does percolate and it spills over, who's going to sign off on it and says it's okay? The tester isn't going to. I don't think the building envelope consultant's going to. The designer's not
No,
going to.
I understand.
So you're stuck in a
we
bit of a-
and we had a situation like that recently in Calgary, and it was a very funny thing. Brought my attention to the fact that a small slider is more vulnerable to that type of thing. So this was a building renovation where the window itself was quite large, but it was a picture over a very small slider. The slider portion was about this big, okay, and it had such bad percolation because the weep hole area versus the amount of frame area was out of whack, you know.
Right.
And so we actually had to remove the weep holes from the track, from the sill track. Like,
Yikes.
not process them for weep holes to stop the percolation.
Oh my God. Okay, we're getting close to time, so I do want to allow if anybody has thoughts or questions. I mean, we'd love to hear, maybe some of your situations or concerns as far as site testing goes, as we work through developing these documents and the standard. Go ahead.
So resident building envelope consultant here. No. So I'm going to make a comment and then ask a question. I do think the onus is on the designer and selector of the products on how, if you want quality assurance testing, you need to be educated on what you're choosing. As Brian's very astutely mentioned, that I find that I'll be going to ask Brian to do a window test and someone has spec'd 720 for their in-situ field test, and I think you could probably fail a lot of things at 720 that say you can't. So I do think the onus is on the designer to understand those things. I will ask you, in your experience, do the specifiers and designers show up to witness window testing in general, or is that an irregular function? I'm not trying to give myself a pat on the back, but I kind of am.
They get a report that says the window leaked, and they don't even read the report. They read the email that says the window leaked, that has the report attached to it, right? And it may say it was an installation issue, right? Like you tested 3 windows and one of them had a leak in the installation. The manufacturer of the window is going to get the first call and okay, send me the test report, right? And then you're going to find out it wasn't the window leaked, it was the installation. But the message that like the architect and the building envelope consultant get is the window leaked. That's it.
Yeah.
And it is on the onus of the tester when you have a leak. To the best of your ability, the report should be very specific in where they saw the water. It shouldn't just be the window passed or the window failed and nothing. You should describe exactly where you saw the water, when you saw the water, and have plenty of photographs so any reader of the report can see where and when you saw the water.
Some of them use very cloudy polyethylene, okay, and they won't see any water until
they cut
after
it
the
away.
test is done.
Yeah.
And then they'll peel the polyethylene off and they'll see mystery drops.
Yeah.
And it's the window leaked. Here's the picture at the end of the test. There was mystery drops. So the window leaked. I was at one test and it was interesting. They had a very, very powerful and expensive, like a $30,000 thermal camera. Not one of these cheap $5,000 jobs, right? And they were able to see the leaks because the water is cold, right? So the interior of the window was warm,
right.
And they were able to see through that poly. Like I see a blue spot, and blue represents cold, and it's at the glazing, right-hand side of the glazing, and it's getting larger and larger and larger very gradually, and then it's not a mystery.
Yes, for sure. Okay, anything else? Yep, Mike, go ahead.
You just brought up an interesting point. The size of the window openings with a smaller operator. So, I had the pleasure of being on one of the tests and couldn't understand why this window was leaking, only to be told by someone who's smarter than me to say the amount of water that's coming off that big picture window on top of this smaller window, that water is now adding into that small window, and you can't drain out quick enough. It doesn't drain out quick enough. And I know I'm not very technical, So, but I know when we go to labs, we'll gateway size, we'll test and stuff like that. How do the testing, I guess, whoever tests it or building consultant envelope, should they be restricting like the size of glass window that they have in order to meet the requirement and say, if you want to achieve this test, you can't put, a 96-inch by 60-inch picture window over a 36 by 24-inch slider or awning or casement with another, 48-inch window and then another 21, because the sheer amount of water that's going to come down.
But if you've supplied that design to the project,
Yeah.
they want to test a representative product from the project. Yeah. So if you've built windows with lots of glass above your horizontal slider, you should make sure they're going to pass before you put them into a.
And that's
project.
why you need to test actual configurations that you're making.
Yeah.
In your own lab, so that you can find out about things like this. Because most people, what do I want to do? I want to qualify all sizes of my sliders that I make. I send the largest one to the lab.
Yeah.
It has A3 air leakage because it divided through by the area, which goes up as the square as you increase the size, and it leaks through the crack length, which goes up linearly as you increase the size, right? So it got A3. You shrink that thing down, it's not even going to get A2, probably in a field water test, right?
So to the point that you made earlier is that there should be, for a project or wherever there's testing, you should pre-test a mock-up, which means now that contractor should be choosing their supplier months or maybe years in advance or during the design phase of it. So everyone's going to have to be proactive to ensure, because we as manufacturers can't be building that window, put it in a test chamber, and then the contractor expect windows in 2 weeks.
Well, I agree. So we had a project in Calgary where they were making very large 6-light units, where the bottom 2 left was the EXO slider, okay? And the product was rated at 290 pascals in the lab. And we could not get it to do 290 pascals in the field. And it was because there was a waterfall running down the face of the window. Yeah. And this was another one of these projects where here's a funny. This project, it's the greatest disaster I've ever been involved in. There were no shop drawings. There was no professional design and field review. There was no building envelope consultant. Okay, and they built. They were 3 buildings into a 4-building project, and the first building was already occupied, and the second building was going to be occupied soon when they sold it to another company, okay, who does all of this stuff and takes this stuff very seriously. And they said, if your windows won't reliably pass 290 in field water testing, we want you to remove them and pay for windows that will pass at 290. He said, you're not being reasonable, and kind of told them to go pound salt. But what we didn't know is that the stupid salesperson, they put a 25-page contract in front of him, okay? And he flips to the last page and he signs our life away and then goes to work for another window manufacturer, a competitor of ours. And it's like, here's the contract. It said, you, the supplier, will do this. You'll do this. You'll do this. You'll do this. Why did you not do any of that stuff? Engineering never even heard of this project. So
lesson learned. Okay, we are running low on time, so go ahead.
Yeah, you're doing a lot of work to standardize this. So you cited the AMA from the States as your precursor. Is there any work being thought of diagnostics for water performance similar like AMA? So I'm citing like water dam tests, like they have that all written out. Is that something?
There is a test method that has nothing to do with ASTM E1105 that is for diagnosing actual field failures in actual exposure conditions. And it deals with more the commercial curtain wall stuff, and it involves like taking a hose and spraying here and there and stuff like that. But its focus is diagnosing an issue. So its focus is totally different from like your typical field water testing. They're actually trying to diagnose an issue so that they can solve the issue using the existing windows and then move on from there.
Yeah.
So it provides a lot more leeway, but if your windows are rated under NAVs, you'll never be able to convince somebody to use that as a method to qualify.
It's a great point, though, and it's not something that we've talked about in the new A440.8 standard. So it's a great point, and I'll definitely make note of, maybe that's something that we can build in. Go ahead.
Just very quickly, in the US, you're allowed to deduct 1/3 off the stated performance rating. Are you pushing for that in the Canadian side? Because right now, I believe in Canada, you're obligated to go 100%.
So the thing is, in Canada, you really should be testing to a pressure that's in accordance with the Canadian supplement to NAVs.
Yeah.
And occasionally you test higher because at one point it's A440.00, A3B3C3 was the maximum requirement for housing in small buildings, and specifiers made that their minimum specification, so you didn't have to go to what was the Canadian supplement at the time, the user selection guide to A440.00. And a lot of testers have continued on with that, except they've substituted B3 300 pascals with the NAVs 330 pascals. And they'll say, I need to conduct this test at 330 in Kamloops with a 1 in 50 driving rain wind pressure is 100 pascals, and it's non-negotiable. But hopefully that was in the contract at the beginning, right? And I've heard a million times, well, that's code minimum. I'm providing a higher level of protection as an engineer.
Yeah. It was a significant point in the documents we were creating in the contract language. Make sure that spec is in there and that you know what it is, so that when you get to site, you're not testing to your NAV's performance values.
And also what happens when you fail, you need that identified up front, right?
Yeah. What's next? Yeah.
What happens when you fail? You test 3 windows, you fail one, you remediate that one, and you test 2 more is typically in the contract. And if it was something that was systemic, they'll want you to do that remediation to the remaining windows on the building. But if that's not in the contract at all, it could be your windows are failing. We need you to refund all of our money.
Yes, indeed. Okay, I don't want to cut it off, but we do have to wrap up. Did you have another one?
I was just going to mention 2/3 is fairly common in specifications I've seen in Canada, like especially Ontario and BC. They'll include that as part of the contract language that you're testing to 2/3 of your test pressure via NAFs, but it's not always there. You need to be clear about what that contract language
Absolutely. Is Steph in the room? Is Steph here? Over here. Gord, do you want to come up? Okay, thanks guys, appreciate it. If anybody's interested in working on this new standard, shoot me an email and I'll get you into the group, and you can help us draft a new Canadian on-site air water test standard. All right.
Yeah, I just first of all, I want to thank Fenestration Canada for putting this on. I just give you a little bit of a history. When we started to look at it, I use the term big brother and small brother, or younger brother. But when we took a look at this harmony that we tried to go ahead and get together with Fenestration Manitoba and Fenestration Canada, it was always looking at to see what would benefit the manufacturers in Manitoba. How could we benefit? How could we bring them up to date of what's going on in the industry? How could we make it more stable? And how could we also look at, that they are just not looking at Manitoba, but they could ship into Ontario, Saskatchewan, and perhaps even in the US, but who knows? But we looked at it from a standpoint of saying there's also things that we did that we really wanted to continue. And when the negotiations went through, we said, we'd like to have FenCon at least every 2 years. And Stefan went to the board and said, yep, that can be done. And so I expected it to happen in next year, not this year. And so I sent an email and they said, no, we wanted to go ahead and make sure that we support the members of in Manitoba that were part of Fenestration Manitoba and now are part of Fenestration Canada, and we're going to do it now. And I just want to thank you so much for making that happen and making this the first part of the success of this whole program that we had to create. I also want to thank the suppliers. I look around the room and there's a lot of good suppliers, and also, you know, just the topics that were put onto the table here and that we heard. Your group, Stefan, did a great job. And we just want to, because this is the first one, want to give you this little thing that it says FenCon. And I just want to present this to you, and you can hang it in your office, or you can use it as a coffee place to put your coffee. But again, I just want to thank you for doing that and for helping us put this whole thing together. It just, I am just so thankful.
All right, great. You want to say something?
Well, thanks a lot. I didn't expect that. I'll just put it here. Well, and that being said, I mean, we had a lot of support from Gordon and his team, and, you know, I see some faces that, you know, we've been having discussion for a couple of years now, I think so, right? So I'm just happy to see you all here, and, you know, with the success of this year, I think we were over 130-ish.
Yep.
I don't think this meant to be every other year. I think we should be here every year. So I guess I can commit as the president here. I don't see him opposing.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, it's happening. So we'll be back next year. Yeah, thanks you guys for being here. And I don't know, Terry, if you have any
I get a little closing
housekeeping
comments.
Okay.
Yeah, you bet.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
And we'll go. Okay. I'm good. Okay. Yeah, we're going to wrap it up. A couple of things though I do want to comment to before we go. Top Glass in Toronto at the end of this month. I'll be presenting for them very briefly. Fenestration Canada has worked and developed a thermal performance calculator for products that are size site specific. It's a long story. It came out of the city of Vancouver and the requirements there. They've now accepted it. They know what we're doing, and they're going to accept it as a compliance path for products that are not model size. So what an NFRC's product is modeled at a certain size, but those values change when that window changes sizes. So City of Vancouver has accepted it. That province of BC has accepted it, and I'm going to be demoing and talking about it at Top Glass. Our AGM spring major achievement. It's a big deal. Yeah. So it's going to be really cool to see that launch this summer. AGM Spring Conference is coming up in Halifax, May 27th to 30th. We'd love to see you there. Tomorrow, we're doing a tour at MacDon Industries at 9 a.m. to 11 a.m., 680 Moray Street. They're going to be taking us through their factory and showing us their processes and how they do things and some of that info. So if you can join us, by all means, please join us there. There is a Manitoba Moose game tomorrow that we have tickets for. If you're interested, they're at the Reg desk. You can grab them there. I do want to also comment what Gord said. Thanks to our sponsors. I mean, I think we have 21 sponsors. We would not be here without them. The exhibitors we have here today, same thing. We wouldn't be here without their support. And we thank them immensely for all of the support that they give to us. Give it up for the sponsors again. Thank you. Personally, I think it was, when did we say we were going to do this? About 3 months ago when we were here? We were here in December, right? And Steph said to me, do you think we can put a program together? So away we went. Hopefully today you picked up some knowledge that you didn't have before you got here. Happy to be doing it. Very pleased to be here and working with the Manitoba industry as members now in Fenestration Canada. committed that we're going to be back next year. So I'll start working on that as far as content goes fairly shortly. If you have topics that you want to hear about or speakers that you would like to see, by all means, shoot me an email, terry@fenestrationcanada.ca, and I'm more than happy to reach out to those contacts and put together a really excellent program. Again, hopefully you picked up something today that was useful for you. We're going to see you back here next year. And then we're going to wrap it up. We're going to have a few drinks sponsored by New Coat. So props to them. I think they're right there. Thank you very much. We're going to have a drink. So, yeah, Brad. I said that. I did. Halifax, May 27th to 30th. Halifax, May 27th to 30th. I'm saying it 3 times. So thank you very much from me. I really like being here. I love doing this kind of stuff. Our team is incredible. We've got a great group that loves doing these kinds of things, working with our members, trying to support them and providing them with the support and info and all of the great activities that we do. So please join us for a drink. I know I need one. And yeah, thank you so much. We'll see you back here next year.